The rain began at exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Laurel Mercer saw the first drops tapping on the pharmacy window and smiled involuntarily. She had always loved rain, especially in summer, when the water was warm and the air was filled with freshness after a shower. Such rains reminded her of her youth, of the carefree days when she and Ethan had just started dating. "Another downpour," commented Grant Foster, who had suddenly appeared behind her. "It must be fate." Laurel shuddered but managed to keep a calm expression on her face when she turned to the new manager. "What exactly is fate?" she asked, even though she knew perfectly well what he was talking about. "The fact that every time we stay late it starts raining," Grant said, leaning against the counter next to her. Too close. "Remember when I gave you a ride home last Thursday?" Of course she remembered. Just like dozens of other little moments that had accumulated between them over the past 3 months, ever since Grant Foster took over as manager of the pharmacy where she had worked for almost 15 years. Little things that added up to something more. His hand lingering on her shoulder, accidental touches when handing over documents, lunches together at the cafe across the street, when discussions about new suppliers segued imperceptibly into conversations about life. "I have my car today," Laurel replied, returning to sorting prescription forms. "I'd offer to give you a ride again," Grant lowered his voice. "But maybe not straight home?" Laurel felt her heart beat faster. She was 43. She had been married to Ethan for 22 years. They had 2 wonderful children, Elliot and Fiona, who were now attending colleges in different states, a beautiful house in the suburbs of Woodhaven, a beach house in Hampton Beach, a life that many would give anything for. So why didn't she pull away when Grant's fingers touched her wrist? "Have you ever thought you deserved more?" he asked. "Something tells me your husband takes you for granted. Am I right?" The truth was that Laurel had been thinking about that a lot lately. She had seen the years fly by. She had seen her youth slip away, and with it her hopes and dreams that had never come true. When was the last time Ethan had looked at her the way Grant was looking at her now, as if she were the most desirable woman in the world? "I have a double shift," she said finally. "I'll be here until 8. "Then we have plenty of time," Grant smiled, and before walking away added, "Think about my offer." That evening, Laurel drove home in the same rain that had been falling all day. The windshield wipers swayed rhythmically before her eyes, hypnotizing her with their movements and evoking thoughts she couldn't shake off. Laurel caught herself driving slower on purpose, delaying the moment of returning home. Finally, she turned onto the driveway of their 2-story colonial-style house. The living room light was on. That meant Ethan was home. Her husband usually came home late. His job as a civil engineer specializing in bridges required frequent travel to job sites. But for the past month, he had been working on a project to rebuild a bridge over the Charles River, not far from the city, and had been coming home at a reasonable hour. She entered the house, shaking the raindrops from her hair. Ethan was in the living room, sitting in his favorite chair with his laptop on his knees. His thin-rimmed glasses had slipped down to the tip of his nose, and his dark, graying hair was tousled, a sure sign that work wasn't going well. "Hi," he said, looking up. "How was your day?" "Quiet," she said, hanging her coat on a hook. "How about you?" "A new project is driving me crazy," Ethan said, rubbing his nose. "I'll have to rework the workload estimates." As if we had time for that. Laurel nodded, walked over and kissed him on the top of his head. It was a familiar gesture, almost automatic, just like asking how his day was or saying goodnight. They existed in different orbits, intersecting only to perform family rituals. "I'll heat up dinner," she said. "I already ate," Ethan said, returning his attention to the screen. "Sorry, I have to finish these damn calculations." Something pricked Laurel, like an invisible needle. Ethan had always waited for her before, even if she was late. They had dinner together, talked about work, the children, planned vacations. When had everything changed? When had their life together turned into parallel lines? In the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of wine and leaned against the counter, staring out the window at the inky darkness, streaked by streams of rain. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. A message from Grant. Thinking about my proposal? Laurel felt something tighten inside her, a mixture of excitement and guilt. At that moment, she heard footsteps behind her. "You didn't tell me Mom called this afternoon," Ethan said as he entered the kitchen. "She asked if we wanted to visit them in June. It's his anniversary." She quickly locked her phone screen. "I'm not sure I can take time off," Laurel replied, avoiding her husband's gaze. Ethan leaned against the doorframe. "You've been working late a lot lately," he remarked. "Lots of recipes, new suppliers," she shrugged. "Nothing special. Just work." "Just work," Ethan echoed, looking at her intently. Too intently. "Is it that new manager? What's his name?" "Grant." Laurel felt the color rise to her cheeks. "What does Grant have to do with it?" "I don't know." Ethan crossed his arms over his chest. "You tell me." She took a sip of wine, trying to hide her nervousness. Ethan had never been jealous. He had always trusted her completely. Had she really drifted away from him so obviously? "We need to talk, Ethan," Laurel said suddenly, surprising herself. "About what?" "About us," she said, setting her glass on the tabletop. "About what's happening between us." Ethan took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. For the first time in a long time, Laurel noticed how tired he looked. Not just tired from work, exhausted by life. "If you want to talk, let's talk," he said. And there was a submissiveness in his voice that, for some reason, affected Laurel more than irritation or anger. "Not now," she shook her head. "Let's talk tomorrow, when we have more time." Ethan nodded, turned, and left the kitchen. Laurel looked at her phone again. Grant's message was still there, waiting for a reply. She knew she was stepping into dangerous territory. She understood that what she was about to ask her husband could destroy their marriage. But as she typed her reply to Grant, she felt a strange determination. It was as if all 22 years of their marriage had been preparation for this moment, when she would have to make a choice, one that would determine who she wanted to be going forward. And that choice was becoming clearer with every raindrop that fell on the roof of her and Ethan's house. "Yes," she typed, "I'm thinking about your proposal, and a lot of other things." Laurel didn't sleep much of the night. She listened to Ethan's steady breathing beside her and thought about how to start the conversation. The words that had seemed right in the dark lost their clarity in the light of day. How could she explain to her husband something she didn't fully understand herself? The morning greeted them with a chill after yesterday's rain. Ethan was making coffee when Laurel came down to the kitchen. They usually had breakfast together on Saturdays, and this morning was no exception, even if the air between them was filled with unspoken words. "Good morning," Ethan said, handing her a cup. "Good morning," she said, taking the coffee and sitting down at the table. Silence hung between them. In the past, moments like this had been comfortable. They had appreciated the opportunity to simply be together without filling the space with words. Now, however, the silence felt tense, like a rope about to snap. "You wanted to talk yesterday," Ethan said, breaking the silence. Laurel took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "Ethan, She faltered, searching for the right words. "I feel like we've lost something between us. Something important." Ethan slowly put down his cup. "I'm listening," he said, his voice steady, but Laurel noticed his shoulders tense. 22 years is a long time," she continued. "We raised children, built careers, created this home. But I feel like somewhere along the way, I lost myself. Do you understand?" "Not entirely," Ethan admitted. "What exactly are you trying to say?" Laurel looked at her hands resting on the table. Small wrinkles had already formed on the skin of her knuckles, the hands of a woman over 40. When had she had time to grow old? "I want to ask for your understanding," she said, struggling to find the words. "I need some time for myself. One day and one night." There was silence, so deep that Laurel could hear the clock ticking on the wall and her own heartbeat. She didn't dare look up. "One day for you and one night for whom?" Ethan asked quietly. The question finally made her look at her husband. Ethan didn't look angry or shocked. There was something else in his eyes, fatigue and, perhaps, resignation. "Ethan, No, don't." He raised his hand, stopping her. "I know about Grant Foster." The name, spoken aloud, sounded like an accusation. Laurel felt the blood rush to her face. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter." Ethan stood up and walked over to the window. "What matters is that I know about your lunches, about the messages you receive late at night. I know about the lingerie you bought last week and hid in the bottom drawer of your dresser." Laurel froze. She didn't think she'd been that obvious. Or maybe she just didn't want to think about it. "And the room at the Jefferson Hotel," Ethan added, turning to face her, "for next weekend." Now she really couldn't say a word. She had booked the room the day before yesterday using a separate credit card. "Have you been following me?" she finally managed to say. "No," Ethan shook his head. "But when you start to suspect something's wrong, you start noticing details. The message that popped up on your phone when you walked away. The conversation you abruptly ended when I walked into the room. The credit card statement you forgot to put away." Laurel suddenly felt terribly small. She had thought that her desire for a day to herself was a bold step toward self-discovery, toward regaining her youth. Now it seemed like a banal betrayal that she was trying to justify with pretty words. "I didn't sleep with him," she said quietly. "Not yet." Ethan returned to the table and sat down across from her. "But you were going to." She couldn't deny it. All her plans, all her thoughts over the last few weeks had been focused on this moment, when she would finally give in to the temptation that Grant represented. "I never thought we'd end up here," Laurel said, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. "That I would become this kind of woman. And I never thought I'd be sitting here discussing my wife's infidelity," Ethan said, the bitterness in his voice unmistakable. "And here we are." Silence fell again in the kitchen. Birds sang outside the window as if this day were no different from hundreds of other Saturdays. "What now?" Laurel finally asked. Ethan interlaced his fingers, looking at her over his hands. "I have a proposal," he said. "You could even call it an ultimatum." He had never spoken to her like that before, as if they were not spouses but business partners discussing a deal. "Next weekend, when you were planning to meet your colleague," Ethan continued, "we're going to our beach house. Just you and me. If you want to save our marriage, this is your chance. If not, if you choose him, then it's over between us. I'll file for divorce." Laurel felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. She had expected anger, shouting, accusations, but this cold determination frightened her much more. "Ethan, it's not that simple." "On the contrary," he interrupted, "it's very simple. You're either with me or with him. There is no middle ground." He stood up from the table and headed for the kitchen door. "Think about it, Laurel. You have a week." He left, leaving her alone with her cold coffee and shattered illusions. Ethan went down to the basement where he had a small study. He closed the door and only then allowed himself to breathe. His hands were shaking and he clenched them into fists, trying to calm down. The conversation had gone exactly as he had planned. Calm, without outbursts or hysterics. He had said what he wanted to say. He had laid down the terms. Now it was up to Laurel. But inside, Ethan was a raging storm. 22 years of marriage, 2 children, a shared home, memories, plans, All of it could disappear because of a man he had never even met. Ethan turned on his computer and opened the file he had created 3 days ago. Divorce Proceedings, it was titled. Inside was a list he had compiled of all their joint property, the house, cars, savings, investments, and a second file where he had begun to figure out how it could all be divided. He wasn't naive. When he saw Grant's message on Laurel's phone 2 weeks ago, he knew their marriage was in trouble. And being a methodical man, he began to prepare for the worst. Not because he wanted a divorce, God, how he didn't want that, but because he didn't want to be caught off guard. Yesterday, he met with a family lawyer. The lawyer advised him not to rush into any decisions and to try to save his marriage. Divorce is always a last resort, he said. Ethan agreed, but left a deposit for legal services anyway, just in case. And this morning, before talking to Laurel, he began the process of separating their finances. He opened a separate bank account and transferred half of their savings there, not to deprive her of money, just to protect himself. Now, staring at his computer screen, Ethan felt sick. How had they gotten to this point? When had the love that had seemed so strong begun to crumble? Had he been so absorbed in his work that he hadn't noticed his wife drifting away from him? Or was it something bigger, the inevitable process of a relationship aging when passion gives way to routine? He knew he wasn't a perfect husband. He forgot anniversaries, didn't always listen carefully when Laurel talked about her day. Work often took up more space in his thoughts than his family. But he had always loved her. He was sure she knew that. But love wasn't enough. She needed something more, something she hoped to find with Grant Foster. Ethan closed the file and leaned back in his chair. He had a week of waiting ahead of him. A week for his wife to decide whether their marriage was worth saving. Laurel spent the entire day in a strange stupor. She made a few calls to her friends, but couldn't bring herself to tell them what had happened. Instead, she talked about the weather, asked about their children, and discussed the latest episode of a popular TV show, the usual topics which now seemed so insignificant. In the evening, she called Grant and told him they needed to talk, not on the phone, in person, on Monday, after work. She didn't know what she would say to him. She didn't know how she felt. The whole world that had seemed so clear yesterday had turned into a puzzle with missing pieces. Ethan spent the day in the garage, tinkering with his car, an old hobby he hadn't returned to in a long time. Then he took a shower and said he was going to have dinner at his friend Neil's. Laurel nodded without asking any questions. They both needed space. Left alone, she went up to their bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of the dresser. New lingerie lay there, wrapped in a store bag. Black lace she had never worn for her husband. Why? They had long since passed the stage in their marriage where such things mattered. But for Grant, she wanted to look special. She wanted to feel desired, beautiful, young. Laurel took out the lingerie and stared at it for a long time. Then she carefully folded it back into the bag and closed the drawer. She walked over to the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. Laughter came from the house next door. The Clarksons were having a barbecue in their backyard, a typical Saturday in the suburbs. Either a weekend together at the beach house or the end of their marriage. Ethan's ultimatum echoed in her head over and over again. The choice that had seemed so simple yesterday now seemed incredibly difficult. What did she really want? New experiences with Grant, who made her heart beat faster? Or the safe haven of a 22-year marriage to Ethan, who knew her better than she knew herself? Laurel closed her eyes. She had a week ahead of her, 7 days to decide what kind of woman she wanted to be. Freddie's coffee shop on Main Street was packed, as it was every Sunday morning. Laurel spotted Haley and Brooke in the far corner at their usual table. They had been gathering here for the past 15 years, discussing life, children, work, and husbands. "You look terrible," Brooke said instead of a greeting when Laurel sat down at the table. "What happened?" Laurel took off her sunglasses, revealing eyes red from lack of sleep. Ethan knows about Grant. Haley nearly choked on her cappuccino. What exactly does he know? She asked cautiously, dabbing her lips with a napkin. Everything, Laurel said, wrapping both hands around her latte cup as if seeking warmth. The messages, the dinners, the new lingerie, even the hotel room at the Jefferson. Damn, Brooke exhaled. And how did he react? A scene? Threats? Neither. Laurel shook her head. He was calm. Too calm, to be honest. He gave her an ultimatum. Either we go to the beach house for the weekend and try to save our marriage, or he files for divorce. Her friends exchanged glances. And what did you decide? Haley asked. Laurel spread her hands. I don't know. That's why I called you. I need advice. Haley set her cup down on the saucer with a characteristic clatter. Unlike Laurel and Brooke, she was the only one who had stayed in her first marriage. 25 years with one man was a record in their circle. Do you really want my advice? She asked, looking Laurel straight in the eye. Because you might not like it. Go ahead, spit it out. Laurel braced herself for the worst. I think you're making a mistake, Haley said. 22 years of marriage isn't something you throw away for a fling with a coworker. Trust me, I've heard this story 100 times. A middle-aged woman who feels like her life is passing her by starts an affair with someone who makes her feel young again. And you know how that usually ends? Enlighten me, Laurel said, her voice tinged with irritation. A broken heart, Haley replied firmly. It doesn't matter if you leave him or not. Stories like that rarely have a happy ending. But your marriage to Ethan is a reality you've been building for 2 decades. Are you really ready to destroy all that? Brooke rolled her eyes. Jesus, Haley, you sound like my grandmother, she said, turning to Laurel. Don't listen to her. Yes, 22 years is a long time, but it's also 22 years of putting other people's desires before your own. First Ethan, then the kids. When was the last time you did something just for yourself? Laurel thought about it. When was the last time? She couldn't remember. Exactly, Brooke continued, correctly interpreting her silence. This may be your only chance to feel truly alive. And who knows? Maybe with Grant, you'll find what you've been missing all these years. Or lose what you have, Haley countered, and be left with nothing. Their argument was interrupted by the waitress bringing fresh pastries. Laurel mechanically picked up a blueberry muffin, her favorite, but she had no appetite. How do you feel about Grant? Haley asked when the waitress had left. Is it really serious or just an attraction? Laurel finished for her. To be honest, I don't know. He makes me feel special, desired. When we talk, it feels like he's really listening, not just nodding like Ethan thinking about his bridges. How long has Ethan not been listening to you? Haley asked gently. Have you tried talking to him about it? Before this whole thing with Grant? Laurel broke off a piece of muffin but didn't eat it. No, she admitted. I guess I just accepted it. I decided that's how it was supposed to be after so many years of marriage. That's right, Brooke interjected. All marriages eventually become routine. That's why I divorced Mike. And Jeremy, Haley teased. And Alex. And I don't regret a thing, Brooke said, lifting her chin proudly. At least I'm living life to the fullest. Laurel smiled as she watched her friends banter. They had always been so different. Haley was the embodiment of stability and traditional values, while Brooke was flighty and always ready for a new adventure. She herself had always been somewhere in the middle, cautious enough to build a stable life, but with a secret longing for something more. You know what surprised me the most? Laurel said, interrupting their argument. Ethan, his reaction. I expected anger, accusations, but he was so collected, like he was discussing a business deal, not the possible end of our marriage. Maybe he's known for a long time, Brooke suggested, and he's come to terms with it? Or maybe he's just trying to save face, Haley objected. Not all men express their feelings by yelling and breaking dishes. Laurel remembered how Ethan had left the kitchen after their conversation. His back was straight, his steps confident. But she knew her husband well enough to notice the tension in his shoulders, the pain he was trying to hide. "I don't want to hurt him," she said quietly. "Then don't," Haley replied simply. "Oh, come on," Brooke shook her head. "Sometimes you have to hurt to move on. You can't spend your whole life sacrificing yourself for someone else's happiness." Laurel looked at her two friends and realized they couldn't give her an answer. The decision was hers alone to make. At the same time, 2 miles away from the coffee shop, Ethan Mercer sat at his desk in his home office. Neatly arranged documents lay before him, their joint will, insurance policies, bank statements, and documents for their house and beach house. Methodically, as in everything he did, Ethan was putting together a complete picture of their financial situation. If Laurel chose Grant, there would be no room for emotional decisions. Everything had to be divided fairly: property, savings, even debts. Ethan had always prided himself on his ability to think rationally, even in the most difficult situations. This trait made him a good engineer. It was also helping him stay strong now. But sometimes, between calculations and sorting papers, his rational facade cracked. His gaze lingered on a framed photo on the desk, Laurel with the children on the beach, laughing and looking at the camera. The picture was taken 10 years ago, when Elliot was 12 and Fiona was 10, a happy time when their family seemed unbreakable. Ethan remembered that day in every detail. They had a picnic on the beach near their summer house. The children built sand castles, competing to see whose would be the tallest. Laurel collected seashells and arranged them into intricate patterns. Then they all went swimming in the ocean, and Ethan held Laurel's hand, feeling the salt water wash over their intertwined fingers. In the evening, when the children were asleep, they sat on the porch, drinking wine and looking at the stars. Laurel rested her head on his shoulder and said, "I think we're the happiest people in the world." And he truly believed that they were. Where had that happiness gone? When had their closeness turned into polite coexistence? Ethan couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. It was just that one day he noticed that he and Laurel no longer talked for hours like they used to. Their touches had become mechanical, that there was no longer any spontaneity or joy of discovery in their lives. He blamed work, problems, fatigue. He told himself it was temporary, that they were just going through a difficult period. And then Grant Foster came along and filled the void in Laurel's life that Ethan hadn't even realized was there. Ethan put down his papers and rubbed his eyes. All these papers, all these numbers couldn't reflect the most important thing, the story of their life together. Their first meeting in college, when Laurel accidentally spilled coffee on him in the library, their awkward first date, the proposal on the bridge in Central Park. Ethan had always loved bridges, long before he started designing them professionally. The births of their children, when he held her hand and felt their love take on a new dimension. All those moments had no monetary value. They couldn't be divided equally in a divorce. On Monday morning, Laurel entered the pharmacy with a heavy heart. She had slept poorly all night, unable to stop thinking about her upcoming conversation with Grant. He arrived at 9 sharp, as always impeccably dressed and confident. When he saw Laurel, Grant smiled and headed straight for her. "You look tired," he said instead of greeting her. "Rough weekend?" "You could say that," Laurel forced a smile. "We need to talk, Grant, after work." He raised an eyebrow. "Sounds serious. Did something happen?" "Not here." She shook her head, noticing their colleague Gina listening in on their conversation. "Meet me at the park at 6. All day, Laurel worked on autopilot, dispensing prescriptions and advising customers with professional politeness that masked an inner storm. Grant tried several times to talk to her alone, but she found excuses to avoid conversation. She needed to collect her thoughts, figure out exactly what she was going to say to him. At 6 o'clock, she met him on a bench by the pond in the city park. It was a quiet place where they didn't risk running into anyone they knew. "So, what's going on?" Grant asked, sitting down next to her. "You've been avoiding me all day." Laurel took a deep breath. "Ethan knows about us." Grant froze for a moment but quickly regained his composure. "So what?" He shrugged. "That's good. Now you can be honest with him." "He gave me an ultimatum," Laurel continued. "Either I go with him to our beach house for the weekend and we try to save our marriage, or he files for divorce." "And you chose the latter," Grant said, not as a question but as a statement. Laurel looked at the water. A small duck swam across the pond, leaving a V-shaped trail behind it. "I haven't decided yet," she said quietly. Grant turned her face toward him. "What do you mean, haven't decided?" There was confusion in his voice. "Laurel, we've discussed this. You said yourself that your marriage has long been a hollow formality. I know, but—" "But what?" His tone was now tinged with irritation. "Do you really think a weekend at the beach will change anything? That you'll suddenly become a happy couple from a romantic comedy again?" "That's not the point." Laurel felt resistance growing inside her against his pressure. 22 years is no joke, Grant. We raised 2 children. We have a life together, friends in common, shared memories, and shared boredom, Grant added, shared disappointment. A shared feeling that life was passing them by. His words hit home. That was exactly how she had felt for the past few years, as if she were watching life from the sidelines instead of living it. "I can't make a decision like this in 5 minutes," Laurel said. "I need time." "Time?" Grant smirked. "You've had plenty of time to think about it. You booked the hotel room yourself. You said you wanted to be with me. I know, but now it's complicated." "No," he shook his head. "Quite the opposite. It's become very simple. You have to choose. Either stay in the past with your husband or move forward with me." Laurel felt a lump rise in her throat. The choice that had seemed so obvious just a moment ago now seemed incredibly difficult. "I can't give you an answer right now," she said. "Then when?" Grant's voice sounded impatient. "I can't wait forever, Laurel. I have feelings too." "Friday," she said, the first date that came to mind. "I'll give you my answer on Friday." Grant stood up from the bench. "Okay," he said, "Friday. But remember, Laurel, there may not be a second chance. I'm not the kind of guy who waits around for things to happen." He left, leaving her alone on the bench. Laurel watched the setting sun paint the pond orange. She felt like that duck, floating with the current, not knowing where it would take her. Friday came too quickly. For Laurel, the days of the week merged into one endless stream of restless thoughts and sleepless nights. In the morning, she sent Grant a message asking him to meet her after work in the same park. He replied with a terse, "Okay." No emotion, no additional questions. It was as if he already knew what she was going to say. But the truth was that Laurel herself didn't know what her decision would be. All week she had been struggling internally, weighing the past and the future, safety and risk, duty and desire. Ethan kept his distance. They still lived in the same house, but it felt like an invisible wall had grown between them. He didn't pressure her or remind her of his ultimatum. He just waited, lost in his thoughts, and that silent anticipation was harder than any reproach. The workday dragged on endlessly. Laurel mixed up prescriptions and made 2 mistakes in dosages, which, fortunately, Gina noticed. Grant kept his distance, only occasionally glancing at her with looks she couldn't decipher. At 6 o'clock in the evening, Laurel left the pharmacy and headed for the park. The autumn air was fresh and cool. The trees along the street were beginning to change color, with some leaves already turning yellow and red. It was a time of change, a time of choice. Grant was already waiting for her on the same bench by the pond. "I'm glad you came," he said, standing up to meet her. The last few days have been stressful. Yes, Laurel agreed, sitting down next to him. For me too. He took her hand. His palm was warm and dry, confident, just like Grant himself, always knowing what he wants. I've been thinking a lot, Laurel began, feeling her heart pound. About us, about my marriage, about what I really want. And what have you decided? His voice sounded impatient. Laurel looked at the water, at the last rays of sunlight dancing on the surface of the pond. She had rehearsed this conversation 100 times in her head, but now all the words she had prepared seemed wrong. I agreed to go with Ethan to the beach house, she said finally. Grant's hand tensed, then slowly released hers. So you chose him, he said, not asking a question. I chose to try, Laurel clarified. 22 years is a long time, Grant. I have to at least try to save what we had. Had, he repeated. The key word is was. What do you have now, Laurel? A routine, silent dinners, polite good nights. His words hit her hard because they were true. The last years of their marriage had indeed become a habit, a comfortable existence side by side, but not together. Maybe we can get back what we lost, she said, not quite believing her own words. Or maybe you're just afraid, Grant said, looking at her with disappointment. Afraid of change, afraid of being happy. It's not about fear, Laurel objected. It's about responsibility. The promises I made. Promises don't mean anything if the feelings are gone, Grant said, getting up from the bench. You know, I really believed you were different, that you had the courage to choose what you really wanted, not what was expected of you. His words sounded like an accusation, and Laurel felt a wave of irritation rise inside her. You don't understand, she said. This isn't just about what I want right now. It's about my whole life, my children, the home we've built together. No, you don't understand. Grant shook his head. Life is too short to sacrifice your happiness for a sense of duty. But it's your choice, Laurel. I hope you don't regret it. He turned and walked away without looking back. Laurel watched him go, feeling a strange mixture of relief and regret. Part of her wanted to call after him, to ask him to stay. The part that longed for new experiences, for passion, for the feeling that she could still be desirable and interesting to a man. But another part, deeper, wiser, understood that what Grant and she had shared was not real love, but an illusion, an escape from reality, from the realization that time was moving inexorably forward, that youth was behind her, that life had not turned out quite as she had imagined. Laurel sat on the bench for a long time, watching the evening shadows lengthen and the first stars appear in the sky. The park grew quiet. Parents were taking their children home, and couples were heading to cafes and restaurants. It was a typical Friday evening in Woodhaven. Finally, she got up and slowly walked to her car. Ethan was waiting for her at home, and she needed to tell him about her decision. When Laurel returned, the house was plunged into semi-darkness. Only the light in Ethan's study was on. She found him sitting at his computer with his glasses perched on the tip of his nose. There were some spreadsheets on the screen, which he hastily closed when she entered. "Hi," he said, taking off his glasses. "You're late." "I had something to do," Laurel replied, pausing in the doorway. "Can I come in?" Ethan nodded, and she entered the study, sitting down on the edge of the sofa against the wall. "You mentioned the beach house," she began. "Is that still an option?" Ethan slowly straightened up in his chair. "It is," he confirmed. "Have you decided?" "Yes," Laurel took a deep breath. "I want to go with you, to try, to save what we have." Ethan's face lit up with hope for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure, returning to a neutral expression. "All right," he nodded. "I was planning on leaving early tomorrow morning, around 6. That way we'll avoid traffic." "I'll be ready," Laurel promised. An awkward pause followed. In the past, they would have discussed what to take with them, what to do over the weekend, what groceries to buy. Now there was an unspoken tension between them that made normal conversation impossible. "Well, I'll see you in the morning," Ethan said finally. "I have a few things to finish up here." Laurel nodded and left the office. In their bedroom, she began gathering her things, packing the essentials into a bag. Her hands moved mechanically, but her thoughts kept returning to her conversation with Grant, to his accusations, to his disappointment. Was she really a coward, clinging to the past out of fear of the future? Or was she just a wise woman who understood that real relationships were built over years, not fleeting moments of passion? Laurel remembered how she had met Ethan. She was a junior in college and he was a graduate student in engineering. Their acquaintance had indeed begun when she accidentally spilled coffee on him in the library. He hadn't gotten angry, just smiled and said, "Now you have to have coffee with me, for symmetry." They dated for 3 years before getting married. Ethan proposed to her on a bridge over the river in Central Park. He got down on one knee and took out the ring he had been saving up for from his modest graduate student earnings. "Bridges connect shores," he said then. "I want our lives to be connected just as firmly." Laurel wiped away an unexpected tear. When had they forgotten these moments? When had everyday worries overshadowed what had once made them happy? Maybe Grant was just a symptom, not a solution. Maybe what she was looking for wasn't a passionate affair with another man, but a return to a sense of self-worth, a feeling that she was seen, heard, and valued. That she wasn't just a mother, wife, and employee, but a woman with her own desires and dreams. After finishing packing, Laurel went to bed. Ethan never came out of his study. Perhaps he had decided to spend the night on the couch there. She didn't blame him. Sleep wouldn't come. Laurel stared at the ceiling, replaying her life in her head like a movie on fast forward. The happy years in college, the wedding, the birth of their children, Elliot's first steps, Fiona's first word, school plays, family vacations, university ceremonies. And Ethan, always there, reliable as a rock. Perhaps sometimes too absorbed in his work, not always attentive to her feelings, but always loving. How could she throw all that away for a fleeting infatuation? When the sky outside began to lighten, Laurel realized she hadn't slept a wink. The clock read 5 in the morning. She had an hour before she had to leave. She got up, took a shower, and got dressed. Her bag was packed and standing by the door. At 5:30, she went downstairs. The house was quiet, but the light in Ethan's study was still on. Laurel peeked in. He had fallen asleep in his chair, his glasses askew, some papers on his lap. She could have woken him, but instead decided to wait in the car. It was a strange decision, but she wanted to show Ethan that she was serious, that she would be the first to wait for him, ready for this trip, ready to try to rebuild what they had lost. The morning air was fresh and cool. The treetops were already turning golden in the rays of the rising sun. Laurel got into their family SUV and turned on the heater. Then she put her hands on the steering wheel and just waited. At 6 o'clock sharp, the door opened and Ethan came out with a travel bag in his hand. He froze for a second when he saw Laurel in the car, then slowly walked forward. His face was tired with dark circles under his eyes. He had apparently had a sleepless night as well. He opened the trunk, put his bag in, and got into the driver's seat. "You could have woken me up," he said. "I didn't want to disturb you," Laurel replied. "You were fast asleep." Ethan started the car, and they drove out onto the deserted morning street. They had a 3-hour drive ahead of them to Hampton Beach, where their beach house was located. 3 hours alone, after a week of silence. They drove in silence for the first half hour. Laurel looked out the window at the waking world. The city gradually receded, giving way to rolling fields and forests. The familiar road they had traveled dozens of times now seemed like a journey into the unknown. "I didn't see him," Laurel said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Grant, at the hotel." Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "I know," he replied. "If you had chosen him, you wouldn't be in the car right now. I saw him yesterday, Laurel continued, in the park. I told him I couldn't. Ethan's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Why? He asked quietly. Why did you choose to come back? The question caught Laurel off guard. She had expected accusations, perhaps anger or relief, but not this direct question which demanded honesty not only from Ethan but also from herself. Because you're my home, she said after a pause. Because what we have is real. Maybe it's not always perfect, not always bright, but it's real. With Grant, it was just an illusion. I liked feeling wanted, interesting. I liked that someone saw me not just as a wife and mother, but as a woman. But it wasn't love. It was an escape. Ethan was silent, thinking about her words. Fields flashed by outside the window, the morning fog still hanging over the ground, creating a feeling of unreality. I've been thinking a lot this week, Laurel continued, about us, about how we ended up here. And I realized it's not just Grant, it's both of us. We stopped talking, we stopped seeing each other, we just existed together. I know, Ethan said quietly. I'm to blame too. I got too caught up in my work. I took you for granted. He glanced at her quickly and turned his attention back to the road. I don't know if we can fix this, he said honestly. I don't know if we have a chance, but I'm glad you're here, that we're at least going to try. Laurel gently placed her hand on his shoulder. Me too, she said. I'm glad we're going to try. The first rays of real sunlight broke through the clouds, flooding the road with golden light. Ahead of them lay a weekend alone, difficult conversations, and an attempt to get to know each other again. But for the first time in a long time, Laurel felt that she had chosen the right path. Not the easiest, not the brightest, but the one she wanted to take. The Merzers' beach house looked exactly as Laurel remembered it, a small white building with blue shutters and a spacious veranda overlooking the ocean. They had bought it 15 years ago when Ethan's career was taking off. All these years, the cottage had served as a refuge from the hustle and bustle of the city, a place where their family spent the best days of their summer. Now, in early autumn, the beach was almost deserted. Only a few locals were walking their dogs along the water's edge, and a couple of elderly vacationers were reading books on folding chairs. Ethan parked the car and took the bags out of the trunk. Laurel breathed in the salty sea air, feeling it fill her lungs and wash away the tension of the city. They talked a little on the way, cautiously, as if testing the ice, discussing neutral topics, the weather, traffic, news from the kids. But they both knew that the main conversation was still to come. I'll get it, Laurel said, taking her keys out of her purse. Inside, the cottage greeted them with coolness and the smell of an uninhabited space. Laurel immediately headed for the windows to let in fresh air and light. Ethan turned on the thermostat and began unpacking the groceries they had bought on the way home. Would you like some coffee? He asked, taking a jar out of the bag. Yes, thank you, Laurel said, opening the living room window. I'll put the groceries away. They moved around the house like a well-oiled machine. Each knew their role, their tasks. 22 years of living together had formed habits that remained even now, when their relationship was teetering on the brink. After putting everything away, Laurel returned to the kitchen. Ethan had already made coffee and was now standing at the window, looking out at the ocean. Hearing her footsteps, he turned and held out a cup. Thanks. Laurel took the coffee, their fingers touching for a moment. I thought maybe we could take a walk on the beach, Ethan suggested. It's a nice day, and we both stayed up all night. Some fresh air wouldn't hurt. Laurel nodded. Perhaps it would be easier to talk while walking when they didn't have to look each other in the eye. They walked along the shoreline, keeping their distance from the water, where the sand was harder. The wind ruffled Laurel's hair, and she occasionally smoothed away unruly strands. Ethan walked beside her, his hands in his jacket pockets. There was a distance between them, not just physical, but emotional as well. Have you ever wondered how we got to this point? Ethan asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Laurel looked at the waves crashing against the shore. All the time, these last few days, she admitted, and I can't find a single answer. It seems like it all happened gradually. Ethan nodded. You know what surprised me the most? He said. Not the fact that you were attracted to Grant. It's that I didn't notice it happening. It's like I was looking at you, but I wasn't really seeing you. We both stopped seeing each other, Laurel said quietly. It's not just your fault. They walked on in silence for a while. Two seagulls circled above the water, occasionally diving for prey. When you told me you wanted a day to yourself, Ethan said slowly, I wasn't as shocked as you might have thought. Laurel looked at him in surprise. Why? Ethan stopped and looked at the horizon where the sky merged with the ocean. Because I understood you better than you think, he said. I understood that desire to feel alive, wanted, to feel that there is something more to life than work and responsibilities. He turned to her, and Laurel saw something new in his eyes, not resentment or anger, but a deep, long-standing sadness. 7 years ago, Ethan continued quietly, I came very close to changing you. Those words hit Laurel like a wave. She felt the ground slip away beneath her feet. What? Was all she could manage. It happened during a business trip to Seattle, Ethan began again, and Laurel followed him, her heart pounding in her chest. I was working on a project for a bridge across Elliott Bay. There was a woman on my team, a structural engineer named Vanessa Holt, smart, beautiful, passionate about her work. Ethan spoke in an even voice, as if he were telling a story about someone else. We worked together a lot, often staying late, and gradually there was an attraction between us. Nothing physical, at least not at first. Just conversations, glances, accidental touches. I told her things I hadn't told you in a long time, about my doubts, my fears, my dreams. And she listened, really listened. Laurel was silent, trying to make sense of what she had heard. 7 years ago. Elliot was 15, Fiona was 13. She and Ethan were going through a difficult period. Teenage children, her promotion at the pharmacy, his frequent business trips. But cheating. She never suspected a thing. On the last night before I came home, Vanessa and I went out for a drink, Ethan continued. We talked about work, about life, and then she invited me back to her place, and I almost said yes, Laurel. I was on the verge of making a decision that could have destroyed our family. He paused and looked into her eyes. But I didn't do it. At the last moment, I realized that no fleeting pleasure was worth what we had built together. Vanessa was a beautiful woman, but she wasn't you. She wasn't the mother of my children. She wasn't the person with whom I had gone through all the hardships and joys of our life. Laurel felt tears welling up in her eyes. Why didn't you ever tell me about this? She asked. At first, out of shame, Ethan admitted. Then because I didn't want to hurt you. And then it just became the past, something you don't talk about. But when you came to me talking about a day for yourself, I knew right away what was going on and why. They reached a large boulder protruding from the sand, and Ethan suggested they sit down. From here they could see the entire bay, the calm blue water stretching to the horizon. I'm not making excuses, Ethan said, looking out at the ocean. And I'm not trying to say that you should forgive me for what I almost did 7 years ago, or that it somehow balances out your infatuation with Grant. I just want you to know that I understand. I understand what it's like to feel invisible in your own marriage, what it means to crave attention, recognition, passion. And I know how easy it is to give in to temptation and how hard it is to resist. Laurel looked at her husband as if she were seeing him for the first time. All these years she had thought she knew him completely, but now she realized that each of them had their own secrets, their own unspoken thoughts and feelings. What happened to Vanessa? She asked. She transferred to another company shortly after the project, Ethan replied. We haven't seen each other since. Laurel nodded, thinking about what she had heard. Ethan's confession completely changed her view of the situation. She had always considered him the moral compass of their family, reliable, loyal, principled. Learning that he too was capable of weakness, that he too had experienced temptation, made him more human. When you told me you understood my desire, Laurel said quietly, you really did understand. Yes, Ethan replied simply. I've been there, and I know how important it was for me to make the right decision back then. That's why I didn't yell at you or threaten you, but gave you a choice. Laurel took a handful of sand and let it slowly slip through her fingers. We created this situation ourselves, she said. For years we drifted apart, immersing ourselves in work, routine, and caring for the children. We stopped talking about the important things, stopped seeing each other as not only parents and partners, but as a man and a woman who once fell in love with each other. Ethan gently covered her hand with his. Can we fix this? He asked. Honestly, Laurel, do you think we have a chance? Laurel looked at their joined hands. Once, that touch had been so natural, so right. Now it felt both familiar and new. I don't know, she replied honestly, but I want to try. Not for the kids or the house or everything we've built. For us. Because what we had is worth fighting for. Ethan squeezed her hand a little tighter. I want to try too, he said. And this time for real. No more secrets or unspoken words. They sat on the boulder, looking out at the ocean, holding hands, not like teenagers in love, but like two people who had come a long way together and were ready to go even further. At the same time, 2 hours away, another conversation was taking place at the Woodhaven Pharmacy. Grant Foster had been summoned to the office of Regional Manager Eleanor Wright. Please have a seat, Mr. Foster, she said, pointing to a chair across from her desk. Grant sat down, keeping a confident expression on his face. To what do I owe the honor, Mrs. Wright? He asked, although he had a gut feeling that the conversation would not be pleasant. It has come to my attention that you have been behaving inappropriately toward employees, Eleanor said, opening a folder in front of her. In particular, I am referring to Mrs. Mercer. Grant tensed but kept his expression calm. I don't understand what you're talking about, he said. Mrs. Mercer and I have a strictly professional relationship. Really? Eleanor raised an eyebrow. What about your frequent lunches together? The personal messages after hours, the offers to drive her home. Mr. Foster, our company has a strict policy regarding office romances, especially between managers and subordinates. Grant felt the color drain from his face. Who told you about this? Laurel? Mrs. Mercer has nothing to do with this conversation, Eleanor cut him off. The complaint was filed by another employee who noticed your behavior. But this isn't the first time something like this has happened, is it? You had a similar situation at your previous job. Grant clenched his teeth. He hoped the story in Boston would remain in the past. I didn't do anything illegal, he said. Everything that happened between me and Mrs. Mercer was consensual. Perhaps, Eleanor nodded. But that doesn't change the fact that you violated corporate ethics. Mr. Foster, I'm not going to beat around the bush. The company is offering you 2 options, voluntary resignation with a letter of recommendation, or an internal investigation with potentially more serious consequences. Grant looked at her, feeling his plans crumble. He had been counting on a promotion within the pharmacy chain, on career advancement. Now all that was in jeopardy because of a failed romance. I'll hand in my resignation today, he finally said. Eleanor nodded. A wise decision. When Grant left the office, his face was darker than the clouds outside. Passing Laurel's desk, he glanced at her empty chair. She was probably with her husband right now, trying to save the marriage she had complained so desperately about. The irony of fate did not escape Grant. He had hoped that his relationship with Laurel would be a pleasant bonus to his career at Woodhaven. Instead, he had lost both the woman and his job. That evening, Ethan and Laurel sat on the porch of the beach house, watching the sunset. It had been an eventful day. After their walk on the beach, they had talked a lot, discussing the years of their marriage, the moments when they began to drift apart, the mistakes they had both made. The conversation was not easy. There were moments when Laurel's voice broke and Ethan turned away to hide his emotions. But for the first time in a long time, they really talked. Not about everyday trifles or children, but about their feelings, fears, and hopes. Now, watching the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky and water in shades of gold and purple, they enjoyed the silence. Not the tense silence of recent years, but a calm, comfortable presence next to each other. "You know," Ethan said thoughtfully, "I've realized something. We can never go back to the way things were, to those young people who met in college." Laurel looked at him, waiting for him to continue. "And that's okay," Ethan added. "We've changed. We've grown up. Maybe instead of trying to resurrect the past, we should create something new. Get to know each other again, not just as the parents of Elliot and Fiona, but as Ethan and Laurel." Laurel smiled, sincerely, for the first time in a long time. "I like that idea," she said. "A new beginning." Ethan held out his hand and she placed hers in his. They knew there was a lot of work ahead of them. The trust that had been broken over the years couldn't be restored in a single conversation. Old habits of alienation wouldn't disappear overnight. They would have to relearn how to listen to each other, see each other, be together. But right now, in this moment, they felt hope. Not a naive belief in perfect happiness, but a quiet confidence that their story was not over. That 22 years was not just the past, but the foundation for a future they could build together if they both wanted to. The sun touched the horizon, casting its last rays on their joined hands. The day was ending, but for Ethan and Laurel, it wasn't the end, but the beginning. A new chapter in the book they had been writing together for more than 2 decades, and which they hoped would continue for many years to come.